Welcome to the Inner Essence, a space of mindfulness, spiritual awakening, and reconnecting with your true self. Breath, be present, and begin your journey with it.
Something strange happens when reality realizes you've stopped listening. The noise it used to make, the problems, the waiting, the repetition, begins to rearrange itself, almost offended that you're no longer obeying its story. The harder it tries to convince you that things are fixed, the more transparent its tricks become, and in that quiet defiance, something impossible starts to move. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding it. This is where perception flips, when ignoring what reality insists is true becomes the most powerful act of creation you can make. You've probably noticed it in small, almost invisible moments. You glance at someone across a room. They sense it, even if your gaze lasts less than a second. Their posture shifts, their tone changes, their awareness flickers toward you. You didn't speak, you didn't act. You simply looked. Yet that simple act altered the field between you. Something moved, both outside and inside. Now imagine that same phenomenon applied to your entire reality. Every situation you look at, every problem you focus on, every emotion you revisit, all of it subtly reshapes itself under the weight of your attention. This is the paradox of observation. What seems passive is in fact an interference. Science stumbled upon this mystery decades ago. In the quantum experiments that tried to measure light as either a particle or a wave, the results depended on the observer's act of measurement. What was being looked at changed because it was being looked at. The universe, it seems, refuses to remain indifferent to awareness. But outside the lab, this principle continues in quieter, more personal ways. Think about the last time you noticed something wrong in your life. The car making a strange sound, the partner who seems distant. The slight ache in your shoulder. The moment your awareness locks onto it, the experience intensifies. You hear the sound more clearly. You read deeper meanings into your partner's silence. The ache becomes sharper. It's not imagination, it's the mind's amplification loop. Observation highlights, and what is highlighted begins to define your experience. Yet here lies the paradox. To see clearly, you must observe, but the very act of observing changes what is seen. You cannot step outside the field. You are part of it. Every glance carries energy. Every evaluation ripples through the system. Even your inner commentary, "This shouldn't be happening. I need to fix this. Why is it always like this?" becomes part of the observation itself. The so-called neutral witness is rarely neutral. Here's where the confusion begins. We are taught that awareness equals control. Pay attention to your goals. Focus on what you want. Visualize your success. But often our observation carries tension, a subtle sense of lack, of trying to make something happen. And that tension isn't neutral. It feeds the very resistance we're trying to dissolve. In that sense, observation is not just seeing, it's a transmission. Your attention is a carrier wave, vibrating with emotion, expectation, and memory. When you observe with anxiety, the field around that subject becomes charged with anxiety. When you observe with calm curiosity, the field softens and begins to reorganize. This is not mysticism, it's coherence in action. Picture a pond, throw a pebble, ripples spread. But throw it while the surface is already turbulent and the ripples collide. Distort, amplify chaos. Your mind is that pond. Each observation is a pebble. If the surface is restless, the impact multiplies confusion. If it's still, a single ripple can travel in perfect symmetry across the water. This is why many spiritual practices, even when stripped of their language, all circle back to the same instruction. See without grasping. Because to truly observe is not to capture, but to allow. When the observer no longer tries to bend what is seen, a strange equilibrium appears. Reality, no longer forced, begins to self-correct. But most of us don't notice how quickly our observation becomes interference. We look at a feeling and call it bad. We look at an outcome and call it failure. We look at uncertainty and call it threat. Each label collapses possibility into a fixed perception, a premature conclusion about what is real. The mind feels safer with definitions, but reality is not made of definitions. It's made of fields that respond. So the paradox of observation is not philosophical abstraction. It's the ground where your experience is constantly being written and rewritten. You think you're just seeing what is. In truth, you're co-creating what will be seen next. And yet, there is an even subtler error hiding here, one that nearly everyone commits without noticing. It's the confusion between observing and controlling. That's where the paradox deepens and begins to turn on itself, becoming not just mysterious, but dangerous. The more you try to use observation as a tool to force change, the more the system resists, as though reality senses manipulation and tightens around it. The more intensely you watch something to make it different, the more it stays the same. Why? Because intention without awareness becomes resistance disguised as observation, and that resistance, quiet and invisible, is what keeps your reality looping in familiar patterns. The next step is to expose this hidden trap, the fatal error of attention. It's the point where your own effort becomes the very wall that blocks transformation. There's a moment, almost imperceptible, when observation quietly turns into control. You think you're simply paying attention, but underneath, a subtle command has slipped in: change. You begin to observe not to understand, but to manipulate. It happens fast, almost reflexively. You look at a situation, judge it as wrong, and the very next thought is, how do I fix this? That impulse is the seed of distortion. The human mind doesn't like uncertainty. It confuses it with danger. So the moment attention meets discomfort, it tries to interfere. It wants to steer, correct, improve. And yet this constant need to interfere is exactly what keeps reality frozen. The irony is sharp. The harder you try to change what you see, the more it resists. Because attention, when charged with control, reinforces the very frequency it hopes to dissolve. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, frustrated with your reflection. You frown, adjust your posture, tighten your jaw, hoping the image will soften. But the mirror doesn't listen to your will. It reflects your state. The more you fight it, the more distorted it becomes. This is how most people use their attention, as a weapon, not a witness. In scientific terms, attention is not a neutral beam. It's an energetic engagement. Neuroscience has shown that focused attention activates networks tied to emotion, prediction, and memory. When you focus on a problem, your brain's predictive system starts scanning for more evidence of that problem. The circuitry of vigilance turns up its sensitivity, and suddenly, the problem multiplies across your perception. It's not that reality is conspiring against you. Your own observation bias is reinforcing the loop. That's the fatal error, mistaking observation for control. You believe that if you just stay positive or keep visualizing, reality will obey. But beneath that effort often lives subtle tension, the fear that things won't work out unless you hold on tightly. And that tension becomes a signal of mistrust, which the field mirrors back as resistance. There's a kind of arrogance hidden inside this error, though it rarely looks like arrogance on the surface. It feels like responsibility, discipline, focus. But at its root, it's still a form of manipulation, the belief that you know how reality should behave. You look at what is, decide it's not enough, and try to edit the universe in real time. Yet in doing so, your attention stops being receptive and turns coercive. And coercion never creates coherence, it creates friction. You can feel this difference in your own body. Notice what happens when you pay attention to something you desperately want to change. A habit, a person, a circumstance. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your jaw subtly clenches. Those physiological shifts are evidence that your attention is no longer neutral. It's effortful, pressurized. The field of observation contracts instead of expanding. When attention contracts, perception narrows. You start missing signals that don't confirm your expectations. A conversation that could have opened a new possibility instead becomes proof that nothing ever changes. A delay that could have brought alignment now feels like failure. Attention drenched in control can't perceive nuance. It sees only evidence of its own tension. And the universe, ever responsive, mirrors that contraction. You observe reality as rigid, and it behaves accordingly. You think you're being proactive. In truth, you're feeding rigidity with every thought of urgency. But what if attention didn't need to control in order to influence? What if the real creative force isn't directive attention, but coherent attention, awareness that holds its focus without friction? When attention becomes clear but relaxed, the nervous system synchronizes with that state. The brain waves shift toward coherence, the body releases stored energy, observation turns into resonance rather than resistance. There's a quiet experiment you can try the next time something triggers the urge to fix. Before reacting, pause and feel what kind of attention is present. Is it heavy, tight, impatient, or is it spacious, curious, alive? That distinction determines whether your observation reinforces the old or invites the new. The fatal error of attention is not moral, it's mechanical. It's simply a misunderstanding of how consciousness interacts with form. Every thought that says, "This must change," declares war on what already is. And what is, being intelligent, resists invasion. But every thought that says, "Let me understand this," opens a channel for transformation. This is not resignation, it's alignment. To observe without trying to force is not passivity, it's precision. It's the moment when your attention stops creating noise and begins transmitting coherence. Yet even this awareness can be twisted if we miss one more crucial layer, the vibrational nature of observation itself. Because attention is not just mental, it's energetic. What you feel while observing determines the kind of field you generate. That's where the true engine of reality begins to reveal itself, hidden beneath emotion, frequency, and resonance. Every act of attention is a transmission. You may think you're only looking, analyzing, or reflecting, but beneath the surface, something far more subtle is happening. Your observation carries tone, not the tone of words, but of frequency. You could call it emotion, resonance, vibration. It's the energetic signature behind what you see. And that signature, not the image itself, is what reality responds to. Modern science has brushed against this truth from multiple directions. In neuroscience, researchers studying attention found that emotion changes not just what the brain perceives, but how neurons fire together. Coherent emotional states, calm, appreciation, curiosity, generate synchronized patterns across neural networks. Chaotic states, anxiety, anger, impatience, create fragmented, dissonant patterns. And the brain doesn't act alone. Its signals ripple through the heart, the gut, the electromagnetic field that surrounds you. What you call attention is not confined to your skull. It's a full-body broadcast. So when you observe something, and a person, a problem, a possibility, you are not just perceiving it. You are bathing it in the frequency of your current state. A thought of fear sends a tremor of constriction. A thought of curiosity releases a wave of openness. The field receives both messages and responds accordingly. You can test this easily in daily life. Speak to someone while subtly judging them, even if you hide it behind a polite smile. They'll feel it, not through logic, but through resonance. Then speak to them while genuinely curious about their experience. The difference in the atmosphere is undeniable. The content of the words might be the same, but the frequency is different. The invisible tone alters the visible outcome. Now imagine that this same principle applies not just to people but to everything you observe. Finances, health, opportunity, memory. The world around you is not inert. It's a network of responsive patterns. When your observation is coherent, it harmonizes. When it's fragmented, it agitates. The material world is a feedback surface for the vibrations your attention carries. This is why trying to think positive often fails. The mind says one thing, "I'm calm and I trust I'm abundant," while the deeper emotional frequency says the opposite. The field listens to the vibration, not the sentence. The words may be beautiful, but if the feeling underneath is anxious or forced, the message that reality receives is one of scarcity and strain. In physics, this principle shows up as coherence and interference. Two waves that align amplify each other. Two waves that clash, cancel, or distort. Your observation is a wave. It can either synchronize with what you want to stabilize or clash against it. When you focus on a problem with frustration, your vibration interferes destructively with the very order you're hoping to restore. When you focus with a neutral or compassionate presence, the interference becomes constructive, patterns reorganize toward harmony. This isn't mysticism in disguise, it's resonance at work. The same laws that govern sound and light also operate in the subtle field of consciousness. Every emotion has a measurable frequency. Every coherent state creates a ripple that organizes energy more efficiently. This is why certain moments of quiet clarity seem to magnetize solutions, not because you forced them, but because your vibration stopped contradicting itself. But few people observe with that level of coherence. Most observation carries hidden noise, the unspoken narrative, the subtle emotional recoil, the urgency to get rid of discomfort. And noise distorts the signal. The more you push, the more turbulence you create. The more you relax into awareness, the clearer the transmission becomes. Think of a tuning fork struck in a room full of other instruments. If one string vibrates in harmony with the fork, it begins to resonate on its own. The sound doesn't come from force but from correspondence. Your consciousness works the same way. What you hold vibrationally calls the matching frequencies into motion. You don't pull reality toward you. You resonate with the aspect of it that already matches your current tone. This understanding shifts the whole meaning of observation. It's not about looking harder or thinking better. It's about tuning the observer. The quality of your attention determines the geometry of your experience. When your emotional state and mental focus align, you enter coherence, and coherence is creative. But here's where the subtle trap reappears. As soon as you try to be coherent, effort sneaks back in. The vibration tightens, the signal wobbles. You cannot force neutrality, you can only allow it. The moment you observe with desire or fear, you send mixed frequencies that cancel each other out. So the question becomes, how do you observe without the weight of wanting? How do you hold your attention without charge, so that observation becomes alignment rather than interference? There is a kind of seeing that dissolves distortion completely, the power hidden in neutrality. It's not detachment and it's not indifference. It's something quieter, purer, and infinitely more transformative. At first glance, neutrality looks like nothing. A flat, lifeless absence of emotion. But true neutrality isn't cold detachment, it's precision. It's the rare state in which attention stops leaking energy into judgment, fear, or desire. In that space, observation becomes pure signal, free from the static of wanting things to be different. And that purity is not weakness, it's power in its most unassuming form. You can sense the difference instantly. Think of a moment when you were deeply agitated, trying to make a decision, prove a point, or solve a problem. Your thoughts collided like currents in a storm, each one charged with urgency. Now contrast that with a moment when you quietly understood something, without argument or struggle. The clarity was almost physical. Neutrality doesn't mean apathy, it means coherence without friction. It's the still point around which everything else organizes. In physics, equilibrium isn't the absence of force, it's the balance of forces. Neutrality works the same way. It doesn't erase emotion or opinion, it integrates them until no single one dominates. When that happens inside you, your nervous system relaxes, your perception widens, and your awareness becomes accurate. What you see stops being distorted by preference. You begin to perceive things as they are, not as your conditioning insists they must be. This shift is subtle but revolutionary. Most people believe transformation requires struggle, that change must come through pressure, strategy, or willpower. Yet when you observe through tension, that tension becomes the message. The field reflects agitation because that's what's being transmitted. Neutrality, on the other hand, is an open frequency. It doesn't push or pull, it allows, and in that allowing, the system reorganizes itself naturally. Imagine holding a compass in your hand while walking through a dense forest. If your hand trembles, the needle quivers endlessly, pointing nowhere. Only when your grip relaxes does the needle align with true north. Neutral observation is that steady hand. When attention stops shaking from emotional charge, the magnetic field of reality reveals its direction. Clarity isn't something you manufacture. It's what emerges when interference ceases. There's a biological parallel to this too. The human body constantly seeks homeostasis, balance between tension and release, excitation and rest. When your attention becomes neutral, your physiology mirrors that equilibrium. Heart rate slows, cortisol levels drop, neural networks shift from defensive modes into integrative ones. The mind becomes less of a controller and more of a receiver. In that moment, intuition, the brain's ability to synthesize vast information without conscious effort, turns on. Neutrality opens bandwidth. But neutrality can feel threatening at first because it dismantles the ego's favorite illusion, control. The mind equates neutrality with passivity, as though letting go means giving up. Yet in practice, neutrality is not surrender to fate. It's surrender of distortion. It's what allows energy to move intelligently rather than reactively. You don't stop caring, you stop clinging. Consider how this plays out in relationships. When you enter a conversation carrying an agenda, to convince, to defend, to win, the energy between you becomes rigid. The other person feels the push and their defenses rise. But when you approach the same conversation from neutrality, simply present and curious, the field softens. Communication reorganizes. New understanding emerges effortlessly, not because you made it happen, but because neutrality removed resistance. This is the invisible mechanism behind spontaneous change. The moment you stop demanding that reality obey your expectations, you make space for intelligence greater than your own plans. Life begins to reveal solutions you couldn't have calculated. The outer world bends not through effort, but through coherence. You become a mirror so clean that truth reflects itself through you. Neutrality, however, requires awareness of your own subtle biases. You can't fake it. You can speak calmly while still vibrating with hidden tension. The body never lies. If you're holding an image of how things should unfold, neutrality hasn't arrived yet. True neutrality feels like release, not of interest, but of urgency. The gaze is still attentive, but it no longer trembles with wanting. You can begin to test this in microdoses. The next time you catch yourself observing something with frustration, a repetitive pattern, a conversation, even your own thoughts, pause for 3 seconds and soften your inner posture. Let the breath lengthen naturally. Feel the difference between looking at something and being quietly with it. That small act of neutral observation changes the vibrational geometry of the moment. It's the difference between shouting at a flame to go out and simply removing the oxygen. And once you glimpse this state, you realize that neutrality isn't static. It has its own current, a quiet rhythm that pulls you toward equilibrium. It becomes an internal tuning fork, calling the scattered parts of your perception into harmony. When neutrality stabilizes, external conditions often follow suit. Problems that felt immovable begin to dissolve, not through resistance, but through resonance. Still, neutrality has a shadow most overlook. Because if observation in neutrality heals, observation in its opposite, judgment and fear, can trap you. When attention vibrates with negativity, it doesn't just fail to create coherence, it multiplies chaos. The same mechanism that stabilizes through neutrality can destabilize through fixation, and that's where the hidden danger of observation reveals its other face, the subtle force that keeps reality repeating itself when fed by negative focus. There's a silent law running beneath every moment of attention. What you repeatedly observe, you feed. Most people think they're analyzing problems in order to solve them, but energy doesn't read your intention, it reads your focus. The more you stare at what you fear, resent or regret, the more vitality you transfer to it. Negative observation is not harmless rumination, it's energetic investment in the very pattern you wish would end. You can feel this law operating in your own body. Picture a situation that triggers you, the unpaid bill, the message left unanswered, the project that refuses to progress. The instant you fix your gaze on it, your breath shortens, muscles tighten around the ribs. The mind begins building scenarios, each one slightly worse than the last. It's as if attention, when soaked in worry, pulls reality into a narrow tunnel. Inside that tunnel, everything echoes your fear. Neuroscience has another name for this phenomenon, the threat loop. When you observe something as a potential danger, your limbic system activates, flooding your body with chemicals designed to help you react, not to reflect. The more often this happens, the more those neural pathways strengthen. What began as a momentary concern becomes a pattern of perception. You start seeing threat everywhere, not because the world changed, but because your observation trained your nervous system to expect it. This is how anxiety feeds itself. It's not the situation that sustains it. It's the repetitive act of observing the situation through a lens of fear. The energy you give to the image becomes the energy that image uses to persist. Negative observation is a feedback loop disguised as awareness. You believe you're being realistic, but in truth, you're rebroadcasting the same frequency that keeps the problem alive. The danger deepens when emotion fuses with narrative. A single thought, "It's not working," gathers evidence to justify its existence. Each piece of evidence strengthens the vibration until attention becomes obsession. What started as a mental note mutates into identity. Nothing ever works for me. The field then responds faithfully to that vibration, rearranging external circumstances to match the internal broadcast. The universe, indifferent to words, answers only the signal. You might recognize this in your relationships. The more you focus on what someone isn't giving you, the more that absence seems to grow. Or in your health, the more you monitor every symptom with dread, the louder your body screams. Observation charged with fear amplifies the noise of what's unwanted. It's not punishment, it's physics. Energy cannot distinguish between attention for and attention against. It only knows where the current is flowing. This is why chronic problem solvers often feel trapped in repetition. They believe constant monitoring prevents disaster, but in truth, it maintains the vibration of tension. Their vigilance keeps reality in lockdown. Like a musician tuning endlessly without ever playing, they mistake precision for control. The melody of life never begins because their attention is too busy tightening the strings. Negative observation is seductive because it feels like engagement. You believe you're doing something by thinking, analyzing, preparing. But mental over-involvement doesn't dissolve a problem. It keeps you entangled with it. Every mental replay of what went wrong reactivates the same neural and energetic signature. The field around you memorizes the pattern. Soon, even silence hums with that vibration. But the real risk isn't just emotional exhaustion, it's perceptual distortion. The more time you spend observing through negativity, the more your reality becomes selective, filtering out anything that contradicts your expectation of loss or struggle. Opportunities slip past unnoticed because they don't fit the established frequency. The world seems smaller, harder, colder. You assume life is withholding, when in fact, your focus has narrowed the aperture through which you see it. There's a way to reverse the mechanism, but it begins not with denial and not with forced positivity. It begins with conscious interruption, a deliberate pause in the act of negative observation. The moment you catch yourself looping inside worry, take one slow breath and shift attention from the story to the sensation. Feel where the fear lives in the body. Don't judge it, witness it. Awareness, when directed inward without narrative, begins to neutralize the charge. The loop depends on unconscious repetition. The pause breaks its circuitry. Still, this interruption must become a practice, not a performance. You won't master it by thinking about it. You'll learn it by observing the mechanics of your own mind in real time. Every time you choose to stop feeding a negative observation, you reclaim that energy for creation. Slowly, your inner field begins to remember what neutrality feels like. From there, coherence rebuilds itself, and this is where I want to invite you into something simple yet powerful. Right now, as you read, notice where your attention is lingering, on the tension or on the clarity that's starting to emerge. Take a breath, feel your shoulders soften, and if this reflection resonates, hit the like button as a physical gesture of release, a tiny visible signal that you are shifting how you observe. Then in the comments, write one sentence beginning with, "Today I choose to stop feeding," and complete it honestly. Let that sentence become your first interruption, your first act of conscious redirection. Because once you begin to redirect attention, even in small increments, something extraordinary starts to happen. The field around you listens and changes tone. And from that shift of focus, a new form of observation begins to rise, one that doesn't drain you, but recalibrates the entire atmosphere of your reality. Every great change begins with a tiny redirection, almost too subtle to notice at first. You shift your gaze by a few degrees, and the entire horizon rearranges itself. The mind wants to believe transformation requires monumental action, but reality bends not through effort, rather through attention's quiet reorientation. This is the micro-reward, the moment you realize that freedom is not somewhere far ahead, but hidden inside the next breath, waiting for you to look differently. After long periods of negative observation, attention develops inertia. It keeps returning to the same emotional coordinates, as if the mind were addicted to the familiar pulse of tension. But this addiction is not fixed, it's conditioned. It can be rewired through deliberate micro-shifts, moments of awareness so brief that they bypass the resistance of the analytical mind. When you redirect your attention even slightly, the whole system receives new data. The energy that was feeding a pattern begins to circulate elsewhere. Think of focus as sunlight through a magnifying glass. When scattered, the light warms but changes nothing. When gathered, it ignites. The secret is not to force focus on what you want, but to soften focus on what drains you. Each time you disengage from a loop of complaint or fear, you reclaim coherence. You don't need to replace negative thoughts with positive ones, you just stop energizing the noise. Here's something to notice in your daily life. The body always tells you when attention is misaligned. When your focus is contracted, narrowed around worry, judgment, or urgency, the body feels tense, forward-leaning, shallow-breathed. When focus relaxes even slightly, the body expands. Shoulders drop. Vision widens. There's a subtle sense of returning home. That shift isn't symbolic, it's neurological. The parasympathetic nervous system activates, signaling safety. From that physiology, perception changes. You start noticing possibilities instead of obstacles. This is why a few seconds of conscious redirection can outweigh hours of mental argument. The nervous system doesn't need an explanation to recalibrate, it needs a signal. The signal is the breath, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. One full exhale resets attention faster than a dozen affirmations, because breath anchors awareness in the body, not in the narrative. The moment you come back to the body, thought loses its authority. The story stops driving, it becomes background noise. You can experiment with this almost anywhere, while standing in line, waiting at a red light, sitting before an uncomfortable conversation. When you feel the usual pattern rising, the tightness, the spiral, pause for 3 seconds and breathe slowly through the nose. As you exhale, allow the eyes to soften their focus. Notice how the external scene subtly reconfigures itself. You're still in the same place, but the emotional geometry of the moment has changed. The field reorganizes because your perception no longer agitates it. That's the essence of the micro-reward. Reality mirrors the smallest inner shifts almost instantly. When focus softens, coherence increases. When coherence increases, clarity follows. You begin to sense the texture of the present moment with more resolution, as if reality had turned up its definition. Even colors appear more vivid, sounds more precise. You're not hallucinating. You're perceiving without distortion. Psychologically, this happens because the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive attention, shares pathways with the limbic system, which regulates emotion. When awareness decouples from emotional charge, the brain's connectivity reorganizes. You regain access to creativity, empathy, and long-term perspective. In simpler words, when focus shifts, intelligence expands. But this new quality of attention doesn't last by chance. It requires repetition, just like any muscle memory. The mind will try to reclaim control, pulling you back into old grooves of vigilance. That's normal. The shift of focus isn't a one-time event. It's a practice of remembering. Each time you notice you've been caught in reactive observation, you simply return. No scolding, no performance. The gentleness of that return is what strengthens coherence. Over time, these micro-rewards accumulate into something extraordinary, a baseline of stability. You stop swinging between extremes of elation and despair because attention no longer takes the bait of emotional turbulence. You begin to perceive yourself as the steady point around which experiences revolve, not the debris being carried by their current. This stability doesn't numb you. It amplifies your capacity to feel without drowning. You can see the difference most clearly in moments of conflict. Before, an argument would hijack your entire system, adrenaline spiking, breath trapped, awareness collapsing into defense. Now, after practicing micro shifts of focus, you notice the surge, but don't merge with it. You stay aware of the breath, the temperature of the room, the other person's tone without immediately interpreting it. That neutrality allows you to respond instead of react. And sometimes that single breath, that microscopic pause, is enough to rewrite the outcome entirely. In these moments, the universe rewards you with something tangible, a felt sense of expansion, almost like fresh air rushing into a closed room. It's brief, but unmistakable. That's coherence returning, energy once trapped in worry becoming available again for creation. You can sense a quiet power humming beneath the surface, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself. This is the real reward of awareness, energy reclaimed, clarity restored. But attention, like any living force, has momentum. Once you learn to redirect it, you must also learn where to let it land. Neutrality gives you stillness, but not direction. The next step is discovering how observation, freed from control and tension, transforms into understanding, the form of seeing that doesn't try to change reality, yet changes it all the same. And that realization turns the entire concept of power on its head, leading to a quiet revelation about where transformation truly begins. All this time, you thought the purpose of observation was to change reality, to fix, to shape, to manifest something better. You believed awareness was a lever, a spiritual form of control. That belief is what kept the loop alive. The twist is this: the true power of observation isn't to change anything. It's to understand. And it's understanding, not intention, not visualization, not effort, that transforms what is seen. For most of your life, you've been trained to equate clarity with achievement. The culture around you rewards results, not awareness. So when you began exploring the mechanics of consciousness, you imported the same habit. You turned attention into a weapon of improvement. If I observe my fear, I'll conquer it. If I visualize abundance, I'll attract it. If I stay mindful, life will stop hurting. But this is just the ego wearing the mask of awakening, a subtler form of control disguised as spirituality. Reality doesn't respond to willpower, it responds to coherence. And coherence doesn't arise from force, it arises from understanding. Understanding isn't mental, it's experiential. It's the moment when the observer and the observed collapse into a single field, when you see something so completely that resistance dissolves. What you call transformation isn't a new state replacing an old one. It's the old one finally being seen without distortion. Imagine standing before a stormy sea. You can spend your life fighting the waves, demanding that they calm down, or you can watch long enough to notice the deeper rhythm underneath the chaos, the tidal intelligence that moves everything in patterns far older than your fear. The moment you recognize that rhythm, something quiets inside you. The waves don't stop, but your relationship with them changes. That change in relationship is transformation. The storm loses its authority. This is what happens when you stop observing to control and start observing to understand. The energy of resistance collapses. The field around the experience reorganizes itself, not because you pushed, but because you stopped pushing. Observation becomes transparency. The thing you were trying to change no longer needs to defend its form against your interference, and so it naturally evolves. The paradox deepens. Reality begins to change precisely when you stop demanding that it should. Neuroscience offers an echo of this truth. When you consciously attend to an emotion without suppressing or amplifying it, activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, decreases. The prefrontal cortex, associated with interpretation and meaning, lights up instead. In other words, understanding regulates experience. Awareness, when free of judgment, rewires the nervous system. You don't need to fix the emotion, you need to see it accurately. Seeing is the integration. This is the hidden principle that even science hesitates to name outright. Observation doesn't just record reality, it participates in it. The act of seeing is an act of creation. But here's what's almost never said. The quality of the observer defines the quality of the creation. When you look with fear, you create distortion. When you look with presence, you generate order. When you look with curiosity, the unknown becomes a living invitation instead of a threat. To understand rather than to control requires a profound humility. It means admitting that the universe may know what it's doing, even when you don't. It means giving up the illusion that you are the master sculptor of circumstances and realizing instead that you are both clay and consciousness shaping each other. Control is linear, understanding is quantum. It doesn't impose, it reveals. Once this becomes clear, the whole architecture of self-improvement starts to dissolve. You begin to see that every technique, affirmation and visualization you've ever used was never about changing reality, but about changing you, about refining the instrument of perception. Because when the observer changes frequency, the observed reality follows without effort. There's an almost sacred irony in this. You've been trying to attract, manifest and engineer what could only arrive through surrender. The force you've been applying was the wall itself. And the moment you stop pushing, space reappears. Space is understanding made visible, the infinite room where new probabilities can emerge. So the twist isn't just conceptual, it's visceral. When you stop using awareness as manipulation, you begin to feel awareness as communion. You realize that consciousness is not looking at the world, it's looking as the world. The separation between observer and observed dissolves, and what's left is participation, pure exchange. In that unity, change happens not because you command it, but because you are it. And this realization opens the next layer of inquiry. If understanding transforms reality, then what exactly happens inside you when consciousness touches matter? How does the internal alignment of thought and feeling translate into external coherence? To answer that, you have to step even deeper, into the invisible bridge between consciousness and the physical world, where vibration becomes structure and the unseen writes itself into form. Everything you experience is a conversation between two fields, consciousness and form. You could call one the listener, the other the echo. Every thought, every feeling, every subtle pulse of attention sends out a vibration that reality reflects in kind. It doesn't happen as cause and effect in the linear sense. It happens as resonance. The outer world isn't reacting to your mind's commands. It's resonating with your inner coherence, aligning itself to the signal you continuously emit. When people hear this, they often interpret it as metaphoric, but the science of it is closer than most suspect. Your nervous system, your heart, and your brain generate electromagnetic fields that extend beyond your skin. These fields don't just register your internal states, they broadcast them. In studies of limbic resonance, researchers found that human beings synchronize their physiological rhythms when in close proximity. Heartbeats and brainwaves subtly align, as if consciousness were contagious. Reality in this sense is not external, it is shared space, a medium of constant exchange. That same synchrony happens between you and what you call the world. Consciousness, through attention, creates coherence or noise in the field. When your internal state vibrates in harmony, clear, steady, unfragmented, the external circumstances begin to mirror that order. When you're in conflict within yourself, your surroundings echo the turbulence. It's not superstition, it's systemic correspondence. The universe doesn't conspire for or against you, it simply tunes itself to your frequency. Consider how often this truth shows up in ordinary life. On days when you wake up agitated, small annoyances multiply. Traffic seems worse, people seem less patient, time seems to move against you. Yet when you feel balanced, those same circumstances unfold with ease. It's not that the outer world changed, your coherence did. The invisible connection is always present, waiting for you to notice its consistency. Reality is not static scenery, it's an interactive field, responsive to the vibration of the observer. In quantum physics, this interdependence is mirrored in what's called entanglement. Two particles that once interacted remain connected, even when separated by vast distances. Measuring one influences the other instantly. This suggests that reality is woven together not by distance, but by information, or more precisely, by relationship. Consciousness functions much the same way. The moment you bring awareness to something, you form a relationship with it, and that relationship alters both of you. You're not an isolated observer watching from outside the system. You are part of the circuitry through which the system evolves. When this realization lands, even briefly, it dissolves the illusion of randomness. What appears as coincidence becomes coherence revealing itself in disguise. The conversation between consciousness and matter never stops. It just changes tempo based on your degree of alignment. Sometimes the reflection is instantaneous, a thought followed by synchronicity. Sometimes it takes time to manifest through physical density. But the principle remains. The outer reorganizes to match the inner. This invisible connection explains why inner clarity has tangible effects. When you resolve internal conflict, opportunities appear not by magic, but because your perception stops filtering them out. The mind, relieved of static, perceives a fuller spectrum of possibility. Neuroplasticity supports this idea. As emotional charge decreases, new neural pathways open, allowing creative associations that were previously suppressed by stress responses. Conscious coherence changes the architecture of perception, which in turn changes what you can act upon. The body participates too. Your heart generates rhythmic patterns that influence your brain through what's known as cardiac coherence. When your heart rhythm is smooth and ordered, typically achieved through calm attention or gratitude, brain waves synchronize, optimizing decision-making and perception. This internal synchronization extends outward. Environments, conversations, even random encounters begin reflecting that order. The invisible bridge between consciousness and reality is built through physiological coherence first, energetic coherence second, and experiential coherence third. But this bridge is fragile when left unconscious. Most people cross it accidentally, creating resonance through fear, guilt, or urgency, without realizing they're broadcasting those states. The field is neutral. It amplifies whatever you send. That's why self-observation is not luxury. It's maintenance. Awareness keeps your frequency clear. Without it, the noise of unexamined emotion becomes the architect of your reality. If you look closely, you'll notice that every event in your life carries an energetic fingerprint that mirrors your state at the time it was formed. Conversations that began in openness evolve smoothly. Those that began in defensiveness spiral into tension. Projects initiated from inspiration attract synchronicity. Those born from fear stagnate. The invisible connection never stops translating vibration into form. And yet, understanding this doesn't mean you must become hyper-vigilant about every thought or emotion. That would only create new distortion. What matters is the tone of your observation, not control but awareness. When you stay conscious of the state from which you act, you're already rewriting the feedback loop. Consciousness and reality aren't two forces negotiating outcomes. They are one continuum discovering itself through you. Still, there's a hidden variable most people overlook, the subtle detail that determines whether you're truly creating or merely reacting. It's the quiet hinge upon which coherence turns into causation, the moment where awareness either collapses into habit or opens into choice. To find it, you must look at the instant before you act, before thought becomes expression, that microscopic gap where reality waits for your instruction. There comes a moment when awareness turns inward and the machinery of effort begins to slow. It doesn't stop because you've reached an answer, but because the need for answers dissolves. The mind, once obsessed with steering reality, starts to sense something deeper moving beneath it, a quiet intelligence that doesn't demand participation, only recognition. This is the shift in consciousness. When you no longer see yourself as the thinker of thoughts or the controller of circumstances, but as the space in which both appear. Until this point, everything seemed dual: you versus the world, observer versus observed, control versus surrender. But as the field of perception widens, those opposites begin to blur. You realize that the line separating inner from outer was never real. The tension between wanting and resisting, trying and allowing, collapses into one unified rhythm. Observation stops being a function of will and becomes a gesture of presence. In that shift, your sense of self rearranges. The I that used to chase meaning becomes the stillness through which meaning arises. It's not enlightenment in the cinematic sense, no thunderclap, no beam of light. It's more like waking from a long conversation you were having with yourself. The words fade, but the listening remains. You begin to perceive life not as a sequence of problems to solve, but as waves of experience folding in and out of awareness. Each one arises, plays its pattern, and dissolves. And instead of trying to freeze or control those waves, you start to listen to their music. This shift can't be forced. It arrives when observation matures into intimacy. The closer you look at experience without trying to change it, the thinner the distance between you and it becomes. Eventually, there's no distance left, only the seeing itself. This is not detachment but participation without friction. You're no longer managing reality, you're dancing with it. Every moment becomes feedback, not judgment. The smallest gestures, washing a dish, breathing in cold air, hearing a stranger laugh, feel precise, luminous, self-complete. From a scientific view, this change in consciousness parallels the emergence of coherence in complex systems. When the parts of a system stop competing for dominance and begin interacting in synchrony, a new order arises spontaneously, one that cannot be predicted from the individual components. Consciousness behaves in the same way. When your attention, emotion, and body stop vibrating at cross purposes, they fall into alignment, and a new level of intelligence emerges. You call it peace, but peace is only its surface. Underneath is pure connectivity. In that state, understanding no longer requires reasoning. You intuitively sense what aligns and what doesn't. Choices become effortless because they're not calculated, they're felt. The nervous system operates with the efficiency of a tuned instrument, responding to the subtlest cues from the environment. Life itself begins to feel conversational, as though reality was speaking to you through synchronicities, sensations, timing. It's not that you've gained control over life, it's that you've rejoined its rhythm. But this new state brings a strange kind of responsibility. The more conscious you become, the more obvious your creative power feels. You notice how a single thought of resentment can contract the entire field, how one judgment can cloud perception. There's no room left to hide behind ignorance. Awareness and accountability become the same thing. To stay conscious is to remain honest about the vibration you're transmitting, not as guilt, but as precision. The paradox is that this precision doesn't restrict you, it liberates you. You no longer need to manipulate outcomes because you trust the coherence beneath events. Even the difficulties, when seen clearly, reveal pattern and intelligence. Resistance fades because everything, even pain, becomes instructive, a messenger from the larger field, reminding you of where you've stopped listening. And perhaps the most striking part of this shift is that it doesn't separate you from others. It dissolves the barrier entirely. You start to feel other people's emotions as variations of the same field that moves through you. Compassion ceases to be an ideal and becomes physiology, a resonance between nervous systems tuned to the same wavelength. Helping another no longer feels like generosity, it feels like homeostasis. The well-being of one becomes the coherence of all. Still, this transformation is not a final destination. It's the beginning of a subtler exploration, one that asks how consciousness, once awake to itself, expresses that awareness through action. Because awareness without embodiment remains potential, and embodiment without awareness reverts to habit. The next movement in this unfolding is to let consciousness flow through form without distortion, to live as coherence, not merely glimpse it. That is where the practice deepens, where reality stops being a mirror and becomes a portal through which the awakened observer begins to create consciously, moment by moment. There's a quiet kind of victory that doesn't look like triumph. No cheering crowd, no dramatic breakthrough. Just a subtle alignment, like two frequencies sliding perfectly into tune. It happens when you realize that clarity isn't something you find, it's what remains once distortion fades. And inner power isn't something you build, it's what's been there all along, obscured by noise. The reward for this journey of observation isn't control over reality, but intimacy with it, a seamless participation in the unfolding of things. Clarity is not an idea, it's a physiological event. You can feel it in your body. It arrives as an unforced stillness, the kind that makes the air feel lighter, the mind quieter. The heartbeat steadies, breath deepens, vision sharpens. You begin to notice small details that were invisible when you were rushing. The way light rests on surfaces, the subtle warmth behind silence, the intelligence in pauses. It's as if reality were exhaling, and for the first time you're breathing with it instead of against it. This clarity doesn't erase complexity, it organizes it. The same circumstances that once felt tangled now reveal pattern and rhythm. You see the threads connecting what you once thought were separate: emotion and thought, intention and event, self and world. When awareness stops fragmenting experience into categories, success versus failure, spiritual versus mundane, inner versus outer, the system self-corrects. The need for resolution gives way to comprehension. Everything begins to make a quiet kind of sense. From a cognitive standpoint, clarity emerges when the brain's networks of attention and emotion synchronize, when the prefrontal cortex and limbic system stop competing and start communicating. This is coherence in motion. The mind becomes both analytical and intuitive, structured and fluid. You stop mistaking control for intelligence because now intelligence feels effortless. You're not forcing understanding, you're allowing perception to organize itself around truth. That's the threshold of inner power. It doesn't shout or push. It doesn't need external validation. It's the power that comes from alignment, when thought, emotion, and action resonate on the same wavelength. It feels like integrity, but deeper, a physiological certainty that you are no longer divided within yourself. There's no friction between what you know and what you do, no delay between insight and movement. You act because understanding has already integrated through you. Inner power expresses itself through calm decisiveness. You no longer need to prove or defend. You choose not from reaction, but from recognition. The world stops feeling like an adversary to be managed and starts feeling like an instrument you know how to play. Obstacles still appear, but they no longer hijack your attention. You meet them as feedback, signals guiding you toward finer calibration. What used to drain your energy now becomes material for refinement. This state isn't fragile. It sustains itself because it's rooted in awareness, not emotion. Emotions fluctuate, but awareness remains constant. The more you return to that steady pulse beneath experience, the more durable your clarity becomes. You realize that peace isn't the absence of challenge, it's the ability to remain coherent in its presence. The outer world continues to shift, but it no longer determines your frequency. You start noticing something extraordinary. When you maintain this inner alignment, external situations begin to reorganize spontaneously. Conversations that were once tense soften. Timing improves. Opportunities appear where frustration used to live. This isn't coincidence. It's resonance reasserting itself. The field adjusts to the tone you hold, and because your power is no longer derived from control, it doesn't collapse when things don't go your way. It adapts, it learns, it expands. The deeper you settle into this clarity, the more subtle your perception becomes. You begin to sense the undercurrent of energy in every moment, not just in your own body, but in the collective field. You can feel coherence or distortion in a room, in a decision, even in a thought. And rather than judging it, you simply adjust your inner frequency until harmony returns. This is mastery, not of the world, but of awareness itself. There's a humility that comes with it. You recognize that every act of observation is creative, every breath a contribution to the larger field. You no longer wait for inspiration. You are the conduit of it. Reality, once fragmented, becomes transparent, a living mirror of consciousness exploring itself through form. In that transparency, you discover what true power feels like. Not the ability to bend life to your will, but the capacity to remain fully present while it moves through infinite variation. And from this space, the next evolution of awareness begins to reveal itself, the realization that clarity and power are not endpoints, but portals. What you once sought outside yourself was only an echo of this internal coherence. The journey doesn't end with understanding. It opens into a deeper invitation to embody what you've seen, to live as the observation itself. Because when consciousness finally recognizes itself in everything it observes, creation no longer needs to be pursued. It simply continues effortlessly through you. Reality never changes because you force it. It changes the moment you become conscious of the one who's observing. Every resistance, every repetition, every moment of confusion was only guiding you toward this, the realization that awareness itself is the creative field. When you stop trying to control the image in the mirror and begin to see the one who's looking, clarity becomes power, and power becomes peace. If you felt that recognition, that subtle inner shift, it means you've reached the end of this journey with presence. Write in the comments, "I see the one who observes." That simple phrase marks your awareness of awareness itself. And if this exploration expanded something in you, stay in that state and watch one of the videos appearing on your screen right now. Each one is another step deeper into the mystery of consciousness, coherence, and the reality you're quietly creating.